Welcome everyone to the Invisible Architecture series. I'm Carol Asa, and this week we have a really great guest. He's been here twice before and got a great response. His name is Richard Coldman. Hi, Richard.
Hello.
And this session, he's going to be talking about projection. And the thing I like about Richard, that of all the interviews I've done, like, I don't know, 60 now or something, he he integrates his own personality into it. Like when he's doing the elements, he takes them through his body and sees how he feels and what they do. He makes it real rather than like a lot of us, we just read about it, we learn about it, but we don't integrate it into our system. And I think you've done that with projection too, right, Richard?
Well, I've been doing my best.
Yeah.
You know,
But I mean, it's a whole different way of going after things that no one else really does. Yeah. So it's unique. So
okay.
I have a little bio here. Like Richard is a musician, composer, filmmaker, and editor. He's also a teacher of Tai Chi, Qigong, and a practitioner of Chinese internal martial arts and meditation with additional input from biofeedback, Feldenkrais, and other somatic arts. And I'll give his contact information when the video's posted. So I know you're into so many other things. Richard lives in Poland, and you're into a lot of other things also besides what I just said, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's all about integration, I think. I feel as if I've lived several um, lives within this one incarnation. I started out as a musician,
Mm-hmm.
and then I had a kind of an identity crisis, and I decided I didn't want to be thinking of myself as a musician anymore. I wouldn't even listen to music for about a year. I
Uh-huh.
got heavily into Tai Chi Chuan, Qigong practice and study, and later on started to teach beginners
Uh-huh.
that. Then I went back and did a degree and studied. Then I got into filmmaking, worked freelanced in television for several years,
Mm-hmm.
and then moved over here and became a baker or an assistant
Oh,
baker,
no, I didn't know that one.
baking organic sourdough bread
Oh,
in this house.
uh-huh.
And then recently, I mean, last year, I remarried, and we're now I'm I have a British wife here with me in Poland, and we are doing workshops with children, young people, where we do art,
Mm-hmm.
creative things, filmmaking, including animation with clay, modeling clay,
Mm-hmm.
and we do everything. We talk in English, and the young people sprout language like hair through dealing
Ah,
with us because we don't teach English, but we speak English, and they
mhm.
communicate with us, and they develop English. I'm following the old Chomsky theory about 50 years ago that I think, he said a small child said, we go to the shops. And we think that's cute. Oh, the kid says we go to the shops. But
Right.
actually, he says it's brilliant because a child of 2 or 3 years old has never been taught grammar. And yet that child is applying a grammatical rule, not knowing that the verb to go is an irregular verb. So they put
Yeah.
ed on the end of go. They're not writing it down. They're saying, we go to the shops. They're
Uh-huh.
applying a grammatical rule. How the hell did they do that? So Chomsky said, we are hardwired for language.
He's so well, it's the innate intelligence he talked about, right?
Yeah, yeah,
He's
yeah.
so brilliant on his all of that. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that was a great insight, and so we use that, and the children, their parents say, "Oh yeah, they're coming home and speaking English," and we go to the shop and they're starting talking about stuff around the shop in English. So we know
Mhm.
it's working,
Uh-huh.
but the children make beautiful stuff. I mean, they really make wonderful little films. That we give them a project, and then each of them takes it in a very individual way. So we there's no uniformity in
Mm-hmm.
our sessions. It's
Mm-hmm.
nothing like school.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a lot of
That's
fun.
great. Yeah. So we're going to get now into projection, right? And you've got several slides you're going to show, and
Yeah, yeah. If providing I can make it work again.
well, it just
Yes,
worked, so it will.
yes, it will. Yes. So yes, I mean, I started reading Jung around 1980.
Mhm.
And I was very fortunate at that time. I was working in a very unique bookshop in London, England. It was called Compendium, and
Mhm.
it was really the outstanding bookshop for, especially for publications from the United States.
Mhm.
So we were the only place where you could go and get books from the States at that time, pretty much.
Mhm.
Uh, 1980, and I was sitting next to the collected works of Carl Jung. So whenever it got quiet, I'd be books. So it was a great, it was a great opportunity to get involved.
Mhm.
And so, I started to think about shadow projection, what that means,
Mhm.
and then later on, I started to concern myself with animus anima, and
Mhm.
we can talk a little bit about that.
Okay.
I can't say that I've Jung said that to understand and to learn to take back one's shadow projection is like the apprenticeship level of self-knowledge. And
Mm.
to take back the projections of the animus anima is the master level.
Ah, okay.
So I don't know where I am on that scale, but it's an aspiration. It's an ongoing aspiration. Well, it's been 43 years. So I hope
Wow.
I'm getting somewhere with that.
Hmm. Okay. So you started out with all of this, like with Edward Bernays, right? I mean, like when you're looking at the projection is kind of he was one of the foremost influencers in the States and, well, in the world, really.
Yeah, I didn't actually learn about Bernays until a few years ago. I mean, it was, I
Oh,
don't know how
okay.
many years ago, but yeah, that came much later. I mean,
Mhm.
I actually, in the 1980s, I did actually look for a Jungian analyst for myself at one point, and I found one in London as a qualified
Mhm.
analytical psychologist. And I had to give him the sack after a few sessions because he was hopeless.
He was what?
He was hopeless.
Oh, okay.
He just didn't cut the
Yeah.
ice for me at all. But then I met a man whose name was Alex Barakan, who had been an assistant of Wilhelm Reich. And
Oh,
he was an amazing guy. He was in his
well, he must
70s.
have had so much information.
He was amazing. He was
Yeah.
wonderful. And he was totally against psychoanalysis. He didn't believe in it at all. He was a counselor, as a psychological counselor. He didn't encourage transference. He's a really interesting guy. Um,
Hmm.
and I learned a lot from him. I
Hmm.
thought of him as an elder, a wise elder that I learned from. And so I came to understand because I think he'd started out in the Freudian framework of the
Right.
psychological framework. So, well, let's look a little bit at Freud to begin with, shall we? Because
Sure.
Freud's really where the idea of projection
Okay.
starts, I guess. So I'm going to try and share this screen.
And I'm going to
Uh,
start. I'm not looking directly at the screen. There I am.
right. So,
It's like I'm looking off to the side. Yeah.
oh no, I've not done it right, have I? I need to switch that off. I'm just going to share my screen,
Okay.
and I'm going to share my desktop, and then I'm going to switch to viewers. Now, do you see
Perfect.
Freud?
See Freud. Yep.
Great. So there's Sigmund Freud, father, known as the father of psychoanalysis. And I won't be doing this all the time, but just now I'm going to run some text across the bottom. I'm going to read it out because this is where psychoanalysis begins.
Okay.
So what we have is Freud believed that the unconscious mind of every human being is populated by primitive sexual and aggressive forces which, if not controlled, can lead individuals and societies into chaos and destruction. So he was a little bit of a pessimist, I guess. Um, and he had a nephew called Edward Bernays.
Mhm.
Bernays is another patriarch who've got here, the father of public relations.
I
Okay.
never realized.
Yeah. So I'm just gonna segue off into something purely for entertainment here. But many years ago, I worked on I edited a video. It was a massive video. It was about driving. It was about how to pass the new driver's theory test. It was 1997, and it was a massive video. It was about 2.5 hours long. But with it came a book, and the guy who directed the whole driving thing, he was an ace police driving instructor. He was an amazing driver. He knew more about driving than anyone I've ever met.
Okay.
And he was great. And we checked and double checked all that was in the video. It was all absolutely correct. And they had a book, and everything in the book was correct. And there was only one typing error, which turned up too late when the book was already published.
Uh-huh.
And it was in the credits, there was a company who were down for pubic relations.
Oh, that's such a Freudian slip.
Yeah, one little letter.
Oh, that's good.
So anyway, he's the father of public relations. Now, public relations. Let's just look at a few pictures of Bernays before I come back on the screen. So he talked about men, but he meant people, and people are rarely aware of the real reasons which motivate their actions. He learned that from his uncle. And he said, if we understand the mechanism and motives of the group mind, it is now possible to control and regiment the masses according to our will without them knowing it.
Oh, wow. Look how long ago this was, writing it out.
Yeah. And now the means that they have now, good heavens.
Right.
Shocking.
So what year is this like?
What year? Oh, well, we're talking about the 1920s, I think.
1920s. Okay.
Yeah, so 100 years ago, good heavens. So, and then he says that propaganda is the executive arm of the invisible government.
Wow.
These were words he was saying in the 1920s.
But you could not say it now, or you wouldn't be on social media.
That's right. Yeah, we've got to be careful, haven't we? I've got to roll on to the next. I just want to show these quotes just to get a sense of.
No, but I mean, it's really so forthright.
Yeah. In almost every act of our daily lives, whether in the sphere of politics or business, in our social conduct or our ethical thinking, we are dominated by the relatively small number of persons. It is they who pull the wires which control the public mind.
Wow.
And then a short one, we are governed. Our minds are molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested.
Wow.
I think there's an aspiration to power here, isn't there?
There is.
Just a bit.
Right.
So I'm back. So Bernays started off by, I think he had a big leap forward in his career when
having your uncle be Freud is one, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I think his uncle sent him a book. I mean, he sent his uncle a box of cigars. I mean, this goes across the Atlantic. His uncle is in Vienna, and he sent his uncle a box of cigars, and his uncle sent him his book. And so he read the book, and he thought, wow, I could do a lot with this. And I think one of the first big splashes that he made was actually with the American Tobacco Corporation, because there was a taboo at that time against women smoking, or at least women smoking in public. And so he had this chat with the president of the American Tobacco Corporation. And the guy said, can you do something about this taboo? I mean, can we break it? So he had this brilliant idea. He knew some New York debutantes, and he got them to, every year there was a parade in New York City. And he got this group of debutantes, wealthy.
Oh, yeah, the Macy's parade.
Yeah. So he got these young women,
Mhm.
who were on the parade. He got them to conceal a pack of cigarettes somewhere on their person,
Mhm.
and at a certain point, to bring out this pack of cigarettes and start smoking on the parade.
Mm.
And then he alerted the press. He told the press that a group of suffragettes,
Mhm. Right.
not debutantes, he called them
Right.
suffragettes, were going to display their torch of freedom. Torch of freedom. So he associated these debutantes with the Statue of Liberty,
Uh-huh.
and the cigarette was the torch of freedom. And the reason was because he'd had a chat with Abraham Brill, who was a big psychoanalyst at that time,
Uh-huh.
and he'd said he'd asked him, so what do cigarettes represent? What do cigarettes represent to women?
Yeah.
And this man, being a psychoanalyst, Abraham Brill, said, well, it's a penis. Somehow he associated this
Right.
long
The shape.
object with a penis. Yeah. I don't know how he made this connection, but he did. And so he said that when women smoke in public, they have their own penis, so they're rebelling against the
God.
patriarchal society.
Oh my God.
So then he told the press that these suffragettes were going to be showing off their torches of freedom. So all the cameras were there, the kind of equivalent of paparazzi were all there.
Uh-huh.
And this thing got big coverage. These debutantes turned into suffragettes, showing off their torches of freedom.
Yeah.
And this rippled across not only the United States, but all around the world. Women started smoking to show that they were claiming their independence.
Yeah. Right.
That was a very powerful.
I mean, could you imagine? And you didn't have television then.
No.
But could you imagine? Yeah. Yeah.
Amazing. So that was, and then later on, I mean, then he was called upon, because he was so successful with that, to advertise all sorts of things. And so he really brought on the consumerist society,
Mhm.
because until then, people tended to buy what they needed.
Oh.
And now people were being encouraged to buy what they want.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, and then the idea that people would want to express themselves through the products, through the car they drove, the clothes they wore, being encouraged to project their individuality. I don't mean project in the Jungian sense, but to show off their individuality through what they wore, through through the way they decorate their houses and everything. And that this was new. This was a new thing, which he basically encouraged. And advertising really started to be, in the old days, we had trading, didn't we? Mm-hmm. We used to trade. Humans used to trade with each other. They used to trade skins and furs for, I don't know, hatchets or whatever. Yeah. And then a medium of exchange was introduced, and we had tokens for trading, money. We got money. Mm-hmm. And now we had marketing, advertising, and public relations and propaganda. And he said, I mean, I won't keep putting things up on the screen, but he said that the only difference between propaganda and public relations is your perspective. Because if it's the opponent, if it's the other people, like those guys over there, then it's propaganda. But when it's us, it's public relations.
And it still is.
Yeah, it still is.
Mm-hmm.
So then he got involved in politics. I can't remember, was it Goodrich? I'm not sure. There was a US president at the time who was very unpopular, taciturn guy. He didn't really...
I don't remember who it was.
He didn't show him. No, it was before your time. But he didn't... but he didn't... he wasn't popular and he wasn't charismatic. Mm-hmm. And Bernays got the idea to get a whole lot of these 1920s film stars to go to the White House, about a dozen of them, and really upgraded the president's image through surrounding him with people everyone adored on the screen. So this was his game, and
Mhm.
his game was really coaching. I mean, it was really getting people to project
Mhm.
and then guiding that
Mhm.
so that he could control the masses. And he thought about human beings in a mass.
Mhm.
He didn't think of the individual actually very much. He
Mhm.
was interested in controlling the mass mind. Apparently, he himself was not charismatic. He wasn't particularly presentable, but I think he got a bit better at it as he got richer, and he had a very expensive suite in a New York hotel where he lived, I think, and he was earning lots
And
of
this
money. So he
just
then
goes
surrounded himself. Hmm?
the me. It just is like the beginning of the me generation, but the me generation is still a mass thing. I mean, it's the me, but you're all dressing alike, buying the same thing.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
you see how he just launched that. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. He really did. So yeah, so I mean, we've very much been subject to propaganda and public relations and marketing um, for the last 100 years, really, thanks to
Right.
Bernays and thanks to his uncle for getting him started on that.
Right.
I mean, Jung has started out studying
Right.
closely with Freud and really
Mhm.
sort of have Freud as a kind of father figure until they started to go their separate ways,
Mhm.
because I think Freud was very much worried about things like theosophy and the new thought that was emerging at the end of the 19th century. And he was very much a materialist, very
Mhm.
much a materialist. And Jung was not that way. I mean, Jung saw something else going on, and he'd had all through his life from his childhood, he had had a sense that there is an invisible world which is actually very, very powerful and in the background to everything
Mhm.
that we do and think and feel. He saw the unconscious in a different way from the way Freud saw it. He didn't see it as something that had to be suppressed and controlled.
Mhm.
I think he got from very early on an idea that to become a self-aware individual, one had to make contact.
Mhm.
Excuse me, with the unconscious.
Mhm.
And he also came to recognize the collective unconscious, which
Mhm.
he said was identical across humanity, even though we have very, very different cultures and so on, that everything is in that collective unconscious, all these archetypes, which I
Mhm.
have a picture of the archetypes, which we can look at. And so Jung saw that Freud was right, that the things about ourselves that we don't like,
Mhm.
the things that we've been trained to suppress or reject, we tend to see in other people. I've watched that happening with children, children children tend to have a very natural sense of fairness,
Mhm.
and they'll say that's not fair, or
Right.
what he's doing is not fair, what she's doing is not fair. But
Mhm.
they can see it in other children more easily than they can see it in themselves.
Mhm.
And so that basic sense of the golden rule is there
Mhm.
in naturally in humans, but we see it externalized. To actually start to see ourselves is a step toward maturity, toward becoming an individual.
Mhm.
And that's something that many of us, if we're not careful, can remain in that childlike state throughout our whole lives,
Mhm.
not self-knowing.
Mhm.
So Jung introduced this idea of individuation. He said to become an individual, one must first be divided. One must first recognize one's different selves, different sub-personalities,
Mhm.
and then integrate them. And
Mhm.
that does involve integrating into our conscious self
Right.
um, aspects of ourselves which we don't like,
Mhm.
and that is the shadow. So
Mhm.
we see in other people things which we don't like about ourselves, and that can happen. So you have wars between nations and ethnicities,
Mhm.
and this is where we project the dark side of ourselves onto them over there.
No, that's
So
interesting. Yeah, looking at it that way. Now, is this he's really into dualism? I mean, because usually when you get into all of this, it's more a trinity. It's it's most more the both and rather than the either or. Did he get into that or?
Jung, I think, was a hermeticist in that sense. There's that distinction between the Gnostics and the hermeticists, because the Gnostics were really dualist.
They were very dualistic. Yeah.
Yeah, and they saw the world, the physical world, as evil, and they wanted to escape
Right.
back into the heavenly realms.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas a hermeticist saw the physical world as everything to be integrated.
Right.
So you have that Trinitarian
Right.
view,
Mm-hmm.
and really it is toward unity. And so Jung was very much a hermeticist, I would say, and he was attracted to alchemy and these. I mean, Jung was always looking to understand the collective unconscious, and he's looking at symbolism. And when he looked at religious symbolism, he saw that rather like social media and mainstream media, it's censored. You know, stories that come down through the ages
Mm-hmm.
in a religious context tend to be filtered. So, for example, in Christian stories,
Mm-hmm.
if it's a fish or a crucifix or the symbols that we associate with Christianity, if someone had a vision which included those, then that would be reported. But if they talked about, I don't know, bears or eagles or something, that tend not to be reported because it's not part of the language. So that would be filtered out. So he came to realize that the realm of religious symbolism was very limited, and he wanted to understand the collective unconscious in an unfiltered way. And the only place where he found access to that was in the writings of the alchemists, because the alchemists were open-minded in their research. They didn't know. They were searching. They were delving like him.
Mm-hmm.
And so if they found some piece of material and put it in their oven and cooked it, and some fumes came out, and they had a non-ordinary experience as a result, went into a state of non-ordinary consciousness, they'd write down everything they saw and heard. They wouldn't limit their writing. So he found in the writings and the images left by the alchemists that he found a very rich representation of the collective unconscious.
I remember like going to a Jungian exhibit at the Arm & Hammer Museum in LA, and laying out there was the Red Book, and it was opened up to the Black Sun. And I had been like studying all this alchemy stuff for all these years, and their big deal was the Black Sun because we have an ellipse, so there's two suns. And then when I saw that Jung, the Black Sun, was one of his major teachings, it was so amazing to me. Yeah.
Yes, it's interesting because we tend to associate symbols with people who've used and abused them, don't we?
Mm-hmm.
The swastika, the Yongdrong of the Tibetans, and well, it's actually a very, very ancient symbol, which the Nazis appropriated and replaced the national flag of Germany with this symbol. And it's now associated with all the terrors of Nazism. But actually, that's not what the symbol meant originally. And so the same with the Black Sun. I mean, it's become associated with all kinds of devilish, awful things. But that's not really what it meant. And so symbolism becomes associated with shadow projection, for example. Those symbols that are not associated with our belief system are devilish and satanic. Yeah. So, I mean, I talk about aspiration. I think that life is a continuous process of adjustment and searching, and I don't claim mastery of anything. I'm an aimed human. I have an aim. I aim to become a self-aware individual and to become more deeply aware of those things which are unconscious. I aim to live my life standing on the threshold of the unknown, and to be a classical skeptic, and not to distinguish between what I believe and what I know. And I aspire to that. I don't always succeed because I do confuse my beliefs with knowledge from time to time, and this is something that I aim to get over it. But I think it's a lifelong process, and we only complete it when we move on to our next iteration of awareness, whatever that is. But so yeah, I see this process of, and I think Jung said himself, we never complete this process. I mean, maybe when we die, we do, but we are constantly delving, or we can be constantly revealing the contents of the unconscious and becoming familiar with it and owning it and integrating it. And only through understanding ourselves in that way can we approach a genuine, authentic morality, rather than an acquired morality or an imposed morality.
Right.
So
it's a lot of hard work.
It's constant hard work, isn't it?
Focused, right?
It's very interesting that I have discussions with people who have very different views about, for example, those people who are very interested in controlling the whole world. There's a few of them, and they meet somewhere in Switzerland, and they're really outright about their ideas. Or the people who say that there's too many of us and feel that it's necessary to depopulate.
Right.
And I will say, well, these are not good people. But from my perspective, they're not good people. They're certainly not practicing the golden rule.
Right.
I mean, the core value of all decent religion is the golden rule. You treat others the way you want to be treated. So those people who talk about depopulation, they do not volunteer to depopulate themselves and their families. They would rather depopulate someone else. So that's definitely not the golden rule.
Right.
And so I don't see that as desirable. But someone will say to me, well, aren't you projecting your shadow onto the globalists?
Oh.
Interesting question.
Yeah, it is.
So I think then, coming back to what you said, I think at the beginning, I think we have to look at feeling. When it comes to shadow projection, we need to observe how we feel, especially when individuals are speaking who we don't agree with. How are we triggered?
Because this was such a deal during the pandemic, of a divide between the vax, the unvax, the this, the that. It really became this dualism, just became so blatant. Yeah.
Yeah. Now that's a good example because, I know people, my wife included, who were, in healthcare, caring, in caring profession, and forced to, they were told that they'd have to take these injections in order to continue to work. And, people who didn't believe it, didn't think it was a good idea, but cared about the people who were taking it and were concerned for them. And so the people on this side of the equation were opposed to it, but not hostile to the people on the other side.
Right.
Whereas those people who were very strong on, Schwarzenegger, saying, screw your freedom, get the shot. They were actually hostile.
Lock them up.
Yeah, actually hostile to those who were what we call hesitant.
Right.
Hesitant. And so the compassion seemed to be on the side of those who are hesitant, not on the side of those who were going for it. But of course, many people went for it simply because they thought they were doing the right thing and saving grandma,
Because they had learned from Bernays how to frame everything. Yeah.
Absolutely. This is really, this is a great Bernaysian trick played on the population of the world. It's difficult for me to understand how people can call someone, a philanthropist, who's talking about depopulation through inoculation, as a well-known person has done many times.
But
It's difficult.
they're venture philanthropists.
Venture philanthropists.
You know what I mean? There's philanthropy and there's philanthropy.
Yeah, really.
Mhm.
I think I have edited some documentaries about, well, privately circulated documentaries about what I consider to be genuine philanthropists. I believe there are.
Mhm.
I had to take back a projection onto very wealthy people. I used to think all wealthy people were evil, and I had to edit some. I did jobs where I edited films about various philanthropists, and one or two of them, I thought, wow, this is genuine. This individual actually wants to give back.
Mhm.
They've acquired a lot of wealth, and then they've decided that they have enough,
Mhm.
and they want to give back. And I think that's great. You know,
it's really being lost in this day and age. That whole thing is being lost, right? Because it's so much the money.
yeah. I wonder, I mean, in the battle that's going on for freedom of speech, if there were not some very wealthy people involved on both sides of that, I don't think we'd have a chance, would we? So one has to trust that there are people with a lot of money
Exactly.
who actually do care about freedom of speech. One has to believe that that is the case, I think.
I think when they talk about the deep state, there's a different variations, but there's one on, like, the side of the people too.
Yeah. Yes, that's right. And this is a subject that is difficult not to get emotional about, isn't it? Because we think about the future. I think about the future of my our children, the children that we work with. I mean, what kind of world are they going to be living in? When I saw during the pandemic, the so-called stimulus, I mean, the amount of money, fiat currency that was printed, it wasn't even printed.
Right.
These vast amounts of money that were just produced,
Right.
the so-called stimulus, while people's businesses are being shut down. And all of that is a debt to the central bank system, which our descendants are faced with having to pay unless we can change all of that.
Wow, I hadn't thought about that. Yeah.
I mean, looking at the US debt clock, you Google the debt clock. Anyone who is interested, go and look at the US debt, and see how it's constantly rising. And then they actually show you on the debt clock how much each individual taxpayer's share of it is, how much everyone earns. And that's, in future generations, if that's not dealt with, that's just going to grow and grow. That is just a recipe for slavery, isn't it?
Well, in the old days, they had jubilees where the debt would be forgiven. And do you know what I mean? But I don't think we're up for that.
No, I mean, it seems that the Federal Reserve is the sort of the classic central bank. I mean, it is because of reserve currency. That is the thing that means that everyone is constantly in debt.
Right.
And there's no escape from it. I mean, there's no way that debt can ever be repaid. There's an Irish comedian called Tommy Tiernan. He's a very, very funny guy, and you can Google him talking about who do we owe all this money to? And it's very, very funny. You can look it up on YouTube.
Can you spell his last name?
Tiernan.
Okay.
And there are clips of him. I think he was doing a show in Canada. And he starts off talking about the national debt of different countries and how massive it is. And it's quite hilarious what he has to say about it. But I think the future for the world where there is individual freedom, that is inseparable from national currencies backed by precious metal, where there is built-in scarcity.
Mm-hmm.
and to remove usury from the system. And I think that's where one would have a world with individual freedom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So with this projection and this shadow work, I mean, it just seems like it's become exponential. It just is like so much now. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, that was the thing that struck me when I don't want to. I'm not going to mention names. I'm not going to
yeah,
name
that's right.
names in the
Well,
world
I've
of
had 2
politics.
videos taken down by people who mention names. So,
All right.
so it's best
Well,
skirt around.
yeah. So I mean, I was filming a series of lectures on Sanskrit in New York in 2018, and I flew over there. And everywhere I went, I was listening to, well, I wasn't listening to the radio. I couldn't get away from it. Radio, TV, and I was hearing constant negative talk about a person who was in very central to US politics at that time. And I'd never come across this before because in my life, it seemed that presidents were always sacrosanct. You know, you didn't speak badly about them, no matter what they did, no matter how many wars they started on lies and so on. They were somehow not allowed to be criticized. But this particular person was. And it was someone I personally didn't like very much.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought to myself, if there's this much manipulation of the mass mind against this person, maybe he's doing something right. I had to take back my own.
It was all free advertising.
I had to take back my own shadow projection on this individual to try to understand why he was being vilified to the extent that he was, to get a more balanced view of what's going on there.
It's a perfect example. Yeah.
And so that was 2017, 2018. I was going through that. And that's given me a very different view. I mean, and I've started to realize how much my own ideas about politics have been manipulated as part of a mass. And, you know, this thing about right wing, left wing, I suppose I personally identified as somewhat on the left, although I never aligned with a political party. And it was terrible to be thought of as right wing. I mean, I think someone accused me of being a right wing nut job because my ideas.
And so, talk about the Gnostic way of looking at things.
So I had to look where right and left came from, and this surprised me. And everyone I tell about this is surprised.
Okay.
During the French Revolution, there was a short-lived parliament where the Republicans sat on one side of the house and the monarchists on the other. The monarchists sat to the right of the speaker and the Republicans sat to the left.
Oh, okay.
So in the original use of left wing, right wing, Republicans were on the left and monarchists were on the right. What happened?
Right.
Language gets...
Lincoln was a Republican. Most people think he was a Democrat, but he was a Republican. You know what I mean? It's...
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's been a lot of I read Saussure when I was studying. You know, Saussure talked about semantics. I mean, he was a great authority on semantics. Saussure was a linguist. He was a central figure in linguistics, and when you study semantics, you kind of tend to read Saussure. I think he was writing in the early 20th century, and he said that you look at language in two ways. There's synchronic semantics, which is the meanings of words as in use now at this time. I mean, to get a snapshot of how we use English language in England, for example, it takes at least a year to do a survey across all these different universities to collect all these words and find out what people mean by them. The word wicked used to mean bad and cruel. And then somewhere in the 90s, it became, wow, oh, wicked, you know, it's like changed its meaning. And so over time, you have diachronic semantics, which is how the words, the meanings of words change over time. One of my great Tai Chi instructor was a Chinese gentleman with pretty good grasp of English. but his English was quaint. And he said to me at one point, I no show this, teaching martial applications. He said, I no show this, if atrocious application to many people. I show you because you're a soft man, but only use if a rascal or a robber comes. Now, we use the word rascal to refer to a naughty little kid, don't we?
Right.
But for him, and also I think even in India not so long ago, rascal, someone who did really horrible things, could be referred to as a rascal. So that word has really slid, So I think language has changed.
Well, and during the pandemic, I know like they went and actually changed words in the dictionary. Like vaccine had a different definition because it did. And they just went into the dictionaries and changed definitions. It was so interesting to me on different, there were other words, but They redefined herd immunity. They redefined it completely. Right. Yeah.
So that it had to be inseparable from inoculation. I mean, that is completely new.
Right.
And so this manipulation of meanings is a very Bernaysian trend. During this past century, we've seen very much the manipulation of language at a very high level of control. And so we are unconsciously, as he said in these quotes, which I put up earlier, we are, as a mass, we are led through these beliefs, through language, through the use of language. And so if you look at Wikipedia, if someone is written about in Wikipedia and they're associated with right-wing ideas, that's considered bad. No one says anything bad about left-wing, even though probably the majority of absolute massive atrocities that occurred in the 20th century happened in China, in the Soviet Union, and, I mean, massive atrocities. But somehow left is okay and right is bad. But right no longer means monarchist. So language, very slippery.
But just like with this whole shadow thing you're talking about, it gets really difficult because the words you're using, the definitions have just slowly been changed. You know what I mean? Even like the thinking process.
So words are used to trigger our shadow, our collective shadow projection. Words are used to trigger it. Right wing. I mean, I don't identify with political wings. I say wings are for the birds. Don't
That's a good
identify at all. And I'm not center, I'm not left, I'm not right. I reject the entire paradigm because I think it's over. The meanings of the words have changed so much that we really shouldn't be taking them seriously anymore. They don't mean anything. We need to be looking at policy. We need to be looking at, I think we need to be looking at the humanity of the individuals who present themselves as being in some way fit to govern or to have high levels of responsibility for society. We should need to be looking at them in terms of their human qualities, rather than which wing they identify with, or this kind of talk, which is all just triggers. It's interesting that Aristotle, this is an interesting thing, isn't it? And Aristotle said that masculine republic gives way to feminine democracy, and feminine democracy gives way to tyranny. Aristotle said that. I've been involved in discussions on Facebook with people who talk about sort of patriarchy and matriarchy and so on, and it's tricky, isn't it? It's very tricky.
Because that's another whole subject of just gender and sexuality and all of that, which is so in flux. All of that. I mean, because again, in going back to Jung, he says that the first step, really, the apprenticeship in understanding our projection is the projection of the shadow, taking back the projection
that one has on a particular individual that one's come to see as terrible, starting to get a clearer sense of who they might actually be, what they might actually stand for, to some extent. Shadow, and then the counter, the animus anima.
Oh,
so
yes.
in the male, the anima is the female side, the unconscious female side of the male, and the animus is the unconscious male side of the female. And so obviously the whole issue of gender is playing with that.
Right.
And so, you know, the idea that we as human beings, as children, we may go through some processes of exploring different parts of ourselves innocently, and then suddenly people are ready to come in and do surgery on a child who's nowhere near ready to make up their minds about their own personal sexual identity, and that parents are forbidden to intervene. I mean, this is extraordinary. And this is really playing on something which Jung talked about in terms of the counter-sexual psychic component. You know, human beings do go through a process of finding their own way with sexuality, and that should happen naturally.
It goes into adulthood. It isn't, you know, you go through those 7-year cycles.
Yes.
Go through the physical, the astral, the mental, you know, and you have to go through each of those cycles to really know who or what you are.
There is a natural apprenticeship for human beings, isn't it?
That's
a natural
That's a good
apprenticeship process. I mean, Moshe Feldenkrais said that when children, you know, 2-year-olds spin, they turn and turn and turn until they fall over. Of course, we parents sort of run over to protect them because they might bang their head, and we say, "Oh no, you mustn't do that." But he's saying that actually, if we don't do that as children, we might become dyslexic as we get older, because there is something going on. It's part of our apprenticeship in our physical incarnation to spin until we fall over. And if we don't allow ourselves to go through that process, there's something incomplete.
Well, I'm dyslexic, and they must not have let me spin.
Well, that might be a reason.
An interesting one. Yeah,
it might have been something else. But you know, these things where we protect. I mean, parents tend to want the best for their children, but we don't always make the right moves. We don't always allow our children to go through processes which are natural to them because it looks dangerous to us. I remember that as a parent. So, you know, crawling, for example, it's natural for children to crawl before they walk. But some children pass through that, and they don't do it, or they don't do it for very long. And that can produce problems later on. Automatic processes like Feldenkrais method, the first thing that tends to happen when they put the client on the couch is that they get into positions lying on their belly with, you know,
like crawling and all of that
shape, because that the human organism needs that. The central nervous system needs that. It's like the way lizards move, you know. And if those stages in our individual development are not honored, I mean, my mother was very protective. We lived on a steep hill, and she didn't want me to learn to ride a bike because she was afraid I'd have an accident. And she was so strong on that I didn't actually get around to learning to ride a bike till I was 26.
Wow.
It was very limiting until I learned it. Once I got on a bike, you couldn't get me off it. I'd ride around inside the house, you know. But the brilliant thing is I remember very clearly the process of learning to ride. And it took me about half an hour going across this garden on this old bicycle, this old push bike, to be able to stay upright. And, you know, I've said this many times, that you could take everything that we know about how humans ride bicycles, and you can fill a book with all of what we've learned about it, everything that can be said about it scientifically or whatever. And someone could get that book
Mhm.
and memorize the entire book so they can quote it chapter and verse like the Bible.
Mhm.
But if they hadn't actually got on a bicycle and been through that process, they wouldn't know how to ride a bike, would they?
Right. Yeah.
So the knowledge, the gnosis, if you like,
Mhm.
comes from the experience. It's not a purely mental job, you know.
Right.
And that is true with all knowledge. True knowledge is
Mhm.
something that we absorb like learning to ride a bike.
Mhm.
It's not purely intellectual.
Mhm.
And I think that academia is flawed because it's cut off from actual life. And
Mhm.
science is flawed because theoretical physics is disjointed from actual practical
Right.
experimentation.
It stays at the lower concrete mind more like.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well,
So,
we only have a few more minutes here, so do you wanna, this was so interesting. I mean, I think we all can just think about, I like really that shadow, like as you look, especially this is going to be valuable in the US going through these elections, you know, because there's going to be so much stuff thrown at everybody and like, yeah, it'll be good practice.
yeah, we have to think about the generations to come and what kind of world we want them to live in. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's so important that we you know, we're dealing in our own lives with ancestral patterns of conflict. We inherit the conflicts from our ancestors, which if we don't resolve them, we pass them on. We have
Right.
to resolve those conflicts in ourselves, and whatever is in ourselves unconsciously, we project it out into the world.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to take back our projections, see the world more clearly as it is, and recognize that those things are in us. We inherited them. We've been programmed through dominant culture. And if we don't resolve those things, we pass them on. So we
Right.
have to, whether we have children ourselves or not, or whether we're just looking at other people's children, the future of humanity really depends on us
Mm-hmm.
knowing ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a good way to end it. Perfect. Thank you, Richard. I just love your thought processes and how you go through really you think deeply about things and feel about it, you know?
Well, I think you're doing a wonderful job with the people that you're interviewing, and I'm totally fascinated by the different things that you're bringing out and getting into electric culture. Listening to your interview from last year is fantastic. It's really great.
Isn't
So
it
thank you for
it's
what you
an
do.
amazing thing that everybody could do and it's so simple and, you know, like
Yeah,
non-toxic.
we've got cold wires springing out all over our
Oh,
kitchen
nice.
garden now. Yeah, yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah.
Okay, well,
Wonderful.
thank you. So
Thank
this
you.
was another good one. Okay,
Thank you very much.
let me make sure I do this recording thing right. Let's see, there it is.